All right, now probably recording. Earlier it was stopped somehow. So the earlier governors of all other provinces, including West Bengal, Bombay, and Madras, were having this similar and same status. But regulating act has enhanced the status of governor of Bengal and made him as governor general, and all other governors were also being made subordinate. All right, so subordinate to him. So idea of or the nomenclature of governor general began with 1773 regulating act. Similarly, this governor general was also assisted by a council of 4 members, and those 4 members were sent from the England. Similarly, the decisions were taken by the majority in the council, means that the governor general was not having discretionary power to override the council members. Means because the decision has to be taken by a majority vote. So, but at the end of it, it is Governor General who is often been blamed for all the decisions made by Governor General in Council. But one privilege was available to Governor General in 1773 Act was Governor General having the right of casting vote. For example, if there is a tie between the tie of decisions, because if 2 members are saying something and 2 members are saying something else, so it is the vote of the governor general which will decide what would be the decision. So the casting vote was always in the hand of governor general. And it is by 1773 act, one governor general for the first time West Bengal got it was Warren Hastings. He was the one who got it. Similarly, another important development was in the field of judiciary. It was Supreme Court for the first time set up at the Fort Williams College, so Fort Williams at Calcutta, with a Lord Chief Justice and 3 judges. Means the idea of Supreme Court was given by the Regulating Act of 1773 with one Lord Chief Justice and 3 more brother judges. So it had the jurisdiction, but the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court was only on the British subjects, those who were British citizens and those who were companies' employees. Only those matters were taken into consideration by the Supreme Court of West Bengal at that point of time. So these 3 developments are very important for constitutional developments in India. Then we have to move forward, and moving forward, there was an amending act in 1781. Let me write. So amending act in 1781. So there were a lot of lacunas in the first regulating act. To correct those lacunas, amending act was being introduced in the British Parliament to remove the defects of the 1773 regulating act. This amending act came into being. This amending act amended the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court and extended it to all the inhabitants of Calcutta. I told you earlier that the Supreme Court, which was being set up by the 1773, was having the jurisdiction only on British citizens and only on the employees of the company. But when this amending act was being introduced in the parliament, it came out with the provisions and with a further explanation of Supreme Court's power, and saying that the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court will extend to all the inhabitants living in Calcutta, but everything was subject to the Supreme Court, but personal laws of Hindus and the Muslims were not to be entertained by the Supreme Court. Means the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court was not extended to the personal laws, means right to marriage and mode of worship, or the inheritance of property, or divorces, these kind of laws which are being exclusively left to the territory of Hindu personal laws and Muslim personal laws. Similarly, there was another development with this amending act was making the Governor General and his council as appellate authority. Means if anything or if any judgment of the Supreme Court is going wrong, it can be appealed to the Governor General in council. So, for the first time, Governor General also got the judicial authority to entertain all such pleas and appeals of the court of as a court of record. So now that appellate jurisdictions was given to the Governor General in council. So these two important developments are important development which has taken place. So then another act came into being in 1784. That act is being famously called as Pitt's India Act. It's Pitt's India Act 1784. So it is often being argued that this act was also to rectify the provisions or the defects of the earlier two acts. This act of is also an example of telling that Parliament of the Britain became conscious of regulating the affairs of the East India Company. And I must tell you, my friends, that through Pitt's India Act of 1784, a clear-cut distinction was being made between commercial and political functions of the East India Company. And earlier, see that there was no distinction, only commercial the function and affairs of the company was being regulated. So it was being dealt with. Now, a clear-cut distinction is being made by this act that what is called political act of the East India Company and what is called commercial act of the East India Company. So a clear-cut distinction was being made. Because why this distinction was needed? Because earlier the court of directors were only to manage the commercial affairs of the company. The board of directors, which I told you in the regulating act, were managing the commercial aspect of the East India Company, and political aspect was not within their purviews. So this time, this Pitt's India Act also came into a picture, saying that the board of directors will regulate or control all acts or operations relating to the civil and military affairs as well as the revenue administration of the company. Means political acts of the company also came under the purview of board of directors, board of control. Another development by Pitt's India Act was like that there was a Governor General Executive Council was being conceded. There must be an Executive Council of the Governor General that was supposed to be consist of 3 members, including the Commander in Chief. So idea is that the Governor General got an Executive Council. Now that we are able to specialize the functions of the Governor General. So we are improving after every act. Similarly, that there was an Act of 1786. Act of 1786. In just 2 years, there was another act, and in this, Lord Cornwallis, and at that point of time, he was being repeatedly requested to be the Governor General of India, and in fact, West Bengal. And at that point of time, Cornwallis was not willing to join India until there are certain conditions are to be met by the Crown and by the Parliament of the Britain. He said that if you want me to appoint as Governor General of Bengal, I must be given the power of Commander in Chief. So there must not be a Commander of Chief as a different person and Governor General as a different person. Similarly, he also made a bargain that I must be given a power to veto the decision of the council. Earlier that the decisions were being made by means of majority votes. Now Lord Cornwallis made a bargain with the government saying that I will join India as a governor general only and only when when I get a veto power to override the decisions of the council. And these two demands were being considered, and this act of 1786 came into being. So imagine a situation now. Governor General got immense power. He got the power of commander in chief. He also got the power of veto to override the decisions of the council. Means his discretionary powers were extended like anything. And after 1786, there was an era called Charter Acts. Then lots of charter acts came into being. After that, beginning of charter acts. Beginning of charter acts. And you know that the first charter act is Charter Act of 1793 onwards. And 1793, then Charter Act of almost 1813, then Charter Act of 1833, then Charter Act of 1853, then till that. So how many charters? There were 4 charters that came into being. So Charter of 1793, Charter of 1813, Charter of 1833, and Charter of 1853. You can see that there is a gap of 20 years in each Charter Act. Means it was mandated that the British Parliament will come with a review act reviewing the developments or the ills or the pros and cons of the earlier acts. So after every 20 years, there was a frequent charter acts. So 4 charters are there. After that's the 1786 Act. You can write 1793. Let us discuss this Charter Act of 1793. 1793. Let us have a discussion. Not much development has taken place, but only thing is that the power of Lord Cornwallis was extended to all the future governor generals and governors of presidencies. I told you that the Act of 1786 came up to give special power to Lord Cornwallis, where commander-in-chief power was also been vested in the governor general, particularly Lord Cornwallis, and he was also given the power of veto. Charter 1793 did 2 things. The first one is that special power which was given to Cornwallis was also extended to all governor generals, whosoever may be appointed after him as well. Similarly, there was another idea that by chance, imagine a situation if Governor General of Bengal is not there to head as a Governor General, then he was being given a power to appoint a Vice President, and that person will be a civilian member of his council, and that member will act in his position. So imagine a situation that whenever Governor General is not in a position to discharge his duties, he may appoint any civilian member from his council as vice president to discharge the functions on his behalf. So 2 things has happened. See that we are now evolving a kind of political system in India. Then Charter Act of 1830 came. Charter Act of 1813. This Charter Act of 1813 is very important. During this period of time, by 1813, East India Company has expanded its rule across India, and they have annexed too many territories. So in only Punjab, Sindh and Nepal were the areas which were not under the direct control of the East India Company. And Lord Wellesley was there. He also made a great advancement, territorial advancement. When the East India Company has expanded its territorial base, Parliament of Britain realized that we need to have some competitions in India. So 1813 Act, the British Parliament ended the monopoly of East India Company to have an exclusive trade in India. This is very, very significant. And for the first time, other European companies were being allowed to have trade in India so that there can be a competition. Similarly, by this act, the power of the board of control also enlarged. They were supposed to superintend, direct, and control the affairs of the East India Company in India. Similarly, local government was also empowered to impose taxes and at the same time punish those who were not paying the taxes. So local self-government, local governments were empowered with collecting taxes. They can have more new taxes. They can also punish those who are not paying it. These are the developments which are being made by 1813 Charter Act. So let us move to the Charter Act of 1833. What has happened during this period of time? By this act, the purpose of the British Parliament was to centralize the power in India. So there must be a centralization of power in India. And at the same time, there must be a parliamentary control over the company. So the parliament will have more exclusive right to control the company, and at the same time, the administration in India, which was scattered, shall be centralized. The second one was that whatever privileges were being given to the East India Company, I'm talking about commercial privileges, those were being withdrawn. So by this Charter Act of 1833, the company was deprived of its exclusive commercial privileges. Third development by this Charter Act of 1833 was that the Governor General of Bengal was being made Governor General of India. See that the entire Indian territory was put under the direct administration of the Governor General, and he is no more only the Governor General of Bengal. Similarly, this act has also given extensive legislative power to make laws, extensive legislative power to Governor General in Council. They were authorized to make laws and regulate all the persons residing there. They were authorized to regulate persons, things, and places in the territory of the company. So the entire territorial administration was put under Governor General of India, who was given the right to make laws for persons, places, and things for the territories under the control of the company. So there was a new centralization taking place. Similarly, that if lawmaking power was given to the Governor General in Council, there must be a law member who is supposed to interpret the laws and to tell that what should be the niceties and nitty-gritties of those laws. A new member was being nominated to his council named as law member. He was not supposed to sit in the discussion on ordinary matters, and he was not having the voting rights as well. He was only supposed to sit in the discourse when the law is being debated and discussed. Similarly, through this act, the presidency governments were deprived of their legislative powers, that they were merely were allowed to propose some laws. They were merely allowed to draft it, some schemes, but the legislative powers were being withdrawn from the presidency governors and exclusively vested in the Governor General of India. That is what the development of Charter Act of 1833. So let us move to the Charter Act of 1853. By 1853, that even Punjab and Sindh were also being annexed by the East India Company. Now there is a total control by the East India Company over India, and this act, in fact, this act is really means something, because this act predicted the abolition of the company in future. So there was a possibility that the East India Company may be abolished in future. So a hint was being given by this act, means that the British Parliament and the British Crown were thinking of abolishing East India Company. Similarly, the strength of the Court of Directors were reduced from 24 to 18, and they were being permitted. So, in fact, out of that 18 members, 6 were being appointed by the British Crown. At the same time, the privileges and patronage of the directors were being withdrawn, because gradually the new powers and new schemes were being coming from the different acts. At the same time, the ordinary members of the Governor General in Council were being made as regular members. They were not ordinary members nominated. They are now regular members. Similarly, and the most important thing is that, and you can draw things that how separation of powers came in India. First time in 1853, through the Charter Acts, there was a separation of legislative machinery and the executive machinery. And that for legislative functions, 6 new legislative members were being added in the Governor General in Council, and total numbers have reached to 12. But the veto powers of the Governor General continued. Separate governor was being appointed for Bengal. But whatever may be, that Indians' demand to have a share in the governance of the country were being repeatedly denied, and they were being not accepted as member in the Governor Generals. All the members in the Governor General in Council were either appointed by the Crown or the Board of Directors or the Governor General nominees, but Indians were not being entertained, and that was what the grievances were there with Indians. And then after 1853, one important development has taken place, and that important development was the Great Revolution in 1857. And you know that 1857 revolution, our first war of independence, had shaken the entire regime of the British, and they have finally realized that they cannot continue with East India Company. Britain decided that they will rule over India directly, and all other officers were already there in in India, where will be the officers of the government of the Britain, or the Great King Britain. So the power was being transferred after the 1857 revolt, and for which Government of India Act 1858 came up. India Act 1858 came up. I'm not indulging into a detailed discussion on 1857 because we have already dealt with it in greater detail in previous classes. So for this discussion, I am concerned with what the act is talking about. So this act of 1858 ended the company's rule in India and transferred the rule directly to the British Crown and government. By this act, Secretary of State is being appointed, and he was being given the role of board of directors and board of control, which we have seen in the earlier periods. The Secretary of State was the person between British government and the governor, viceroy in India. So idea is that Secretary of State was being made powerful, having most of the rights of the board of governors or the board of the control. Secretary of State was assisted by a Council of India having 15 members, of which 8 were being appointed by the Crown and 7 were being elected by the Court of Directors. So imagine a situation that now the power was being completely transferred. A new position is being created called Secretary of State, and he was being given all the powers. And from now onwards, the Governor General was being named as Viceroy. So this is all about the Charter Acts. But what is more important, I am here to discuss, is the, I can say, Queen's proclamations. Proclamation of 1st November, that is very, very important. Let me write. 1st November 1858. And that is called a Magna Charta, mini Magna Charta in India. So what is being, the first one is that. So in this, let me come out that with these proclamations, Queen has said that we have finally assumed the responsibility for the governance of India. And in that, it said that it assured that what the proclamation did, it assured the Indian princes that all treaties and engagements made by the company would be scrupulously observed by the Crown. It disclaimed desire for any further territorial possession. It also promised to respect rights, dignity, and honor of the princes, asserted its determination to faithfully and conscientiously fulfill its obligation towards the Indian people and to consider them at par with the British subjects. This proclamation also promised to stimulate industry, to promote works of public utility, and to govern the country for the benefit of all its subjects. The proclamation assured complete freedom of religious belief and worship to the people and promised that no discrimination shall be made on the basis of race or creed in matters of appointment to the offices under the Crown. So this is the this proclamation is often been termed as the Magna Carta of India. No doubt it is quite significant in terms of orientation and belief. But whatever the powers were being granted to the people, the middle class and the landlords, with the 1215 Magna Charta, the same was being granted almost by the British Queen to the people of India, to the princes in India. So this is what about the first part before till 1858. And from now onwards, there is a beginning of the Council Act. Council Acts. It's a period from afterwards. Most of the acts were being named as Council Act. And the first one is the Council Act Act of 1861. The second one was the Council Act of 1892. Then there was an Indian Council Act. Third one was that Council Act, Indian Council Act 1909. So the three council acts came up. After that, a Government of India Act 1858. So till now, if you have any questions, you can raise your hands. Yes, any questions? Any clarifications? No? So you people are having no doubts. Whatever we have discussed so far. Vaibhavi, Charter
Yes, sir.
Act of 1853. Charter Act of 1853 abolished, in fact, not abolished, it predicted the abolition of the company in future. It also strengthened the court of directors, but reduced its number from 24 to 18, and permitted the crown to appoint 6 members out of 18. But most of the privileges were being withdrawn. Administrative officers were to be appointed by means of a competition, not by nomination, that also being introduced. Ordinary members of the Governor General in councils were being regularized. Now they were the regular members. There was a separation of legislative machinery, and new legislative members were being nominated. 6 additional legislative members in the council, making total of 12. Despite everything, the Indians were not being given share or the membership in the Governor in General Council as a partner, as the one who can share shoulder to shoulder the governance with the British Governor General. And that has really anguished the Indians. This is what 1853 is all about. You got the point? Because Governor General of Bengal, there were lots of governors. There were presidencies, there were provinces where governors were there. The ultimate object of making Governor General of Bengal as Governor General of India was to centralize the authority in India. Already Governor General of Bengal enjoying the superior status. All other governors of the presidencies were subordinate to him. But in actuality, the governors were asserting their whole authorities and making sense of that urgent situations are there, and they had to use their discretionary powers. But by this time, the East India Company has controlled most of the territories. Yeah, and with whatever were being left, they were under a contract with the British and having accepted the suzerainty of the East India Company. And therefore, the ultimate goal was that we may have a single Governor General of India, and the Governor General of Bengal will have a separate governor. It will act as a presidency only, not as a superior status. 1853 Act, that Charter Act of 1853, has appointed a separate governor for West Bengal, for Bengal. So, because of the centralization of authority, because of making uniform laws for all over the India, And because of lots of responsibilities in political administration, it is thought of why not to have a separate all India administration apart from mixing regional administration with the national administration. That is what the reason was. You got the things, better. All right. So can we move to the next? And what is that? 1861. So Council Act. Let's have some discussion. Council Act of 1861. And why it is so important? Because 186 through 1861 Act, for the first time, the Indians were being associated with the administration of the country. They were also being given membership in the Governor General's Council. So this act introduced some important changes, and the first one is that it introduced representative institution in the country for the first time and associated Indians with the legislative work of the country. So this is very, very important that for the first time Indians were being asked to affiliate with the legislative work of the Governor General. This act also enlarged the Council of the Governor General by providing for not less than 6 and more than 18 additional members to the Governor General in Council. At least half of these members were to be non-official members and could hold office for 2 years period of time. This is important. Similarly, there was a legislative council which was given the power to make laws and make regulations for all persons, places, and things, and public servants inside and outside British India. The council was not to enact any law. In fact, there is an exception that the council could not enact measures relating to public debt or public revenues, religious matter or military matters or naval matters. For all these things, that legislative council were not supposed to make the law, and where Indians were also being associated. The Governor General still was having the power to veto the bills enacted by the Legislative Council. So what purpose does it serve? That if anything important made by the Indians association, Governor General ultimately veto it and say that no, it cannot be done in the interest of the country. So veto power was being regularly exercised. Similarly, that some powers were being given to the presidencies. Provincial legislatives were to ensure that their laws shall not be contrary. They were also being given the power to make laws. So this act was quite important because it, for the first time, introduced the principle of representations. Indians were also being associated with the administration. It also introduced the portfolio system, is that certain people will have separate responsibilities. People will not be say that I was not given clear-cut responsibilities. So the idea was this is a very, very important and relevant act which has made the Indian Legislative Council quite big. More Indians were being associated, more powers were being given. Still, the Governor General was enjoying the privileges. So this is all about the Council Act of 1861. So let us move to the Council Act of 1892. And you must remember that by 1892, Indian National Congress was already functional. I told you in the last discussion that Indian National Congress was established in 1885, and Indian National Congress was repeatedly making requests, praying and filing petitions that the British government should associate more and more Indians in the councils of the Governor General. So, because of the pressures generated by the Indian National Congress, there was some increase in the additional members of the council. In the Central Council, the minimum number of additional members were for legislative functions were increased from 8 to 10, and the maximum limit was 12 to 16. In the case of Madras and Bombay, the increased strength was to be not less than 8 and not more than 20. The maximum number for Bengal was fixed at 20 and for UP only 15. The act empowered the Governor General in Council to make rules regarding the nominations of the members. These are important things. The members could ask questions on domestic matters. Earlier, that the members were supposed to sit and take part in the discussion, but they were not allowed to raise questions. Now that the members could ask questions, the members were also authorized to discuss the budget, but without the rights to vote. You have a rights to have a discussion on budget, but you cannot vote and you cannot deny it. Similarly, that right to vote on it was not there. There was a demand of a division of the house on any issues, but it was also not being considered. The question on public interest could be asked subject to such conditions were being set by the Governor General. And so everything was like that. The council was getting enlarged. New Indian members were being nominated, but in terms of power, it was still limited by the discretionary power available to the Governor General in Council. So it has its own importance. It has led the importance of the representative government. It has started the principle of elections in India, but that elections were indirect in nature. The legislative council members were supposed to discuss the financial matters or budget, but they were not supposed to vote, and they were only about to raise questions on public importance on domestic issues, but those were only of influencing the behavior of the Governor General, but not having any concrete base. So that is what the whole 1892 did. It did not satisfy the Indians, and Indians were quite adamant of making concrete reforms council or in the Indian administration. They wanted more and more power, more and more share in the council, and more accountability of the Governor General to the people of India. So this is what has happened with 1892, not satisfying anybody, and people were still praying, petitioning it. And I told you that the Congress by that time was dominated by the moderates like Firoz Shah Mehta, Tayyab Ji, Umesh Chandra Banerjee. All these people were merely interested to have cooperation, but still demanding by using constitutional methods. So those were the things. And the most important is Indian Council Act 1909. Important. Indian Council Act 1909. This is also called Morley-Minto Reform. Morley-Minto reforms. Lord Morley was Secretary of State, and Lord Minto was the Viceroy, and they both proposed some important changes in Indian administrative system, because 1892 did not satisfy the Indians. They wanted to make certain changes and certain provisions they have discussed. And I must tell you that this is why 1909 is important. And you must recall that India at that point of time had experienced the ruthless policy of Lord Curzon, who divided Bengal into two parts based on the Hindus and Muslims size of populations. The purpose was to strengthen the divide and rule policy of the British, and by dividing the Indian population on religious life, they wanted to rule over India for some more period of time. So this Morley-Minto reforms was also having a background that by this time we had two communal organizations on our scene, and first one was Muslim League, which came into being in 1906 probably, and similarly and Hindu Mahasabha also came into being side by side. So the two communal organizations were already in place, apart from Indian National Congress, claiming that it represents the India's national interest. what Parliamentary reforms did, you must remember, and it also sowed the seed of communalism in India. This act also provided for the enlargement of the councils, both central and provincial council, which we are seeing regularly that with 1861 onwards, the council of the governor generals were being enlarged and more Indians were being associated. And Indians were being associated as additional members for the legislative purposes in the Viceroy's Executive Council. And with this parliamentary reforms, a huge increase has been made from 16 members to 60 members. So 60 members, additional members. The Legislative Council of Madras, Bengal, Bombay were also increased to 50 members. The provincial legislatures of the UP, that is at that point of time, it was called United Province, was to have 50 members. Punjab and Assam and Burma each were having 30 members as additional members legislative council. This is very, very important because now more Indians were being associated with the council. With this 1909, the principle of direct elections were being adopted. So voting rights were being granted to send representatives to the council. So this is what the contribution of this act. Similarly, this Governor General's Legislative Council consisted of four categories of members. The one was the ex officio members, who were by virtue of having office, they were the members. Second were the nominated officials. They were members who were nominated by the Governor General and the Crown and the other officials. They were nominated non-official members, and there were elected members. See that. The fourth category is elected members. Here, in 1909, Indian Council Act introduced the principle of election in India, and that is what the beginning is. So the act remained the majority of the official members. In fact, the majority were official members, Sarkari member, that the members having support for the British company and British rule. So whenever the discussions were supposed to take place, it is always by the majority, and majority was on the side of the British. They get their work done, and they will get their decisions passed. Similarly, that the act dispensed with the official majority in the provincial legislative assemblies, legislatures. They retained the majority in the central council, but they somehow say no to the official members majority in the provinces, the provincial legislative council. It was certainly a welcome feature in India's constitutional development, that the provincial legislatures were more accountable to the elected elements. So all non-official members were mostly Indians. They were supposed to raise questions, hold the government accountable. They were playing their role at that point of time. So they did well. Similarly, that this act has also increased the function of the imperial as well as provincial legislative council. Members of the imperial legislative council were permitted to discuss resolutions on matters of general public interest, but their recommendations were not binding on the government. That also empowered the members to discuss the budget and move resolutions before it was being finally approved. They were also allowed to ask supplementary questions to move resolutions on matters relating to the loans to the local bodies, additional grants, and new taxes. Similarly, the Act for the first time gave recognition to the elective principle for the appointment of non-official members to the council. The Governor General was empowered to make detailed regulations for giving effect to this proposal of effective council. This act was also important because it has recognized the communal electorates. The Muslims were being permitted to elect certain members from their own community, and similarly that this right was also being given universities, chambers of commerce, landholders. Separate representation was also being ensured. So apart from Muslims were being given separate electorates idea, other specific interests like business class chambers, zamindars were also given rights to send their own representatives. So these are the developments of the parliamentary reforms. Any questions so far? Because this is very, very important. Any question? No, no questions. All right. So are people? Are you there? Kirtana, are you there? Rajeshwari, Swapna, you people listening or somewhere else? All
We're
right,
listening, sir.
all right, all right. So some interjections should take place in between. Otherwise, things will not go as naturally as it's going. So we are here to move to a new, yes, Rashmi, separate idea of separate electorates was being introduced by this Parliamentary reforms, and separate electorates is often being termed as communal electorates. In this mechanism, Muslims were allowed to elect their own representatives and send them to the Governor General's Legislative Council. That is why it is being said that the Muslims were being given special privileges with the repeated demands of the League of Nations. At that point of time, it was being objected. Similarly, zamindars of that period of time were also being given exclusive privileges. They have to send their representatives in the Governor General's Council. Similarly, that the chambers of commerce, those commercial interests, business classes were supposed to elect their own members and then send to the legislative council. Similarly, that corporations, universities, educated intelligentsias were being recognized, no doubt. So the communal electorates was for the first time recognized when the principle of election was introduced in India. It was by means of 1909 Indian Council Act. So Rashmi, in a way, you are right. Got the point? So now the point is to discuss Montague Chelmsford Reform Act of 1919. And this act is also known as Government of India Act 19. This act was also has also introduced important changes both in the government at the center and at the level of the provinces as well. So this act is important because it has come out with such kind of resolutions and recommendations which were relevant for all the three stakeholders. The one was the home government in Britain, then there was a government at the center in India. Then there were a government at the level of provinces. So all the three levels of changes were being introduced. So by this act, let us look at the home government level. That what has happened with the British government. So with this Government of India Act, the Secretary of State of India, which was being paid out of the Indian revenues, was now being paid by the British Exchequer. So now that Britain will pay the salaries and emoluments of the Secretary of the State, not the Government of India. Similarly, this act considerably weakened the position of the Secretary of State in England by transferring some of his powers and functions to the High Commission for India. Now that there is a High Commission for India, delegating some of his powers to the Governor General in Council. Similarly, that High Commission for India was to be appointed and paid by the government of India. Now that the High Commission position was started, and that High Commissioner was to be paid by the government of India. Secretary of State is now being paid by the Britain. Similarly, that the control of Secretary of State was reduced in the provincial spheres in India as far as transferred subjects were concerned, but his control over the center remained as complete as before. The act reduced the strength of the Indian Council, that Secretary of State's Council named as Indian Council, where that members were reduced, were also reduced. In fact, reduced, and their term were also being reduced from 7 years to 5 years. So I don't remember exactly what was the size. Earlier it was 15 members were there to assist the Secretary of State. And what was the size after that? 1980, 19. I am missing at the moment. I can tell you later on. Similar, this was the changes were being brought in for the British government in relation with India. So there were certain changes which were being brought in for central government. The Act of 1919 did not introduce any fundamental change in the composition and power of the Central Executive Council. The unrestricted and despotic powers of the Governor General were left untouched. Governor General was already enjoying immense power, and that no change has been brought up for regulating the power of the Governor General. He continued to be responsible to the British Parliament through the Secretary of State as before. He was not into the whole soul making accountable government. So no mega change were being introduced in so far as the power of the Governor General is concerned. But in fact, that Governor General, in fact, the Viceroys, in the Viceroy's Executive Council of 8, 3 were to be Indians. That now that the executive powers were also being given to Indians, so the total 8 members were there in the Viceroy's Executive Council. Three were supposed to be Indian. This act has clearly stated. There was to be two lists there were two lists for administration. One is the central list of administration, and another one is the provincial list of administration. You can see that the idea of division of power between center and states is being concretized by this act. There were the Viceroy retained its control over the reserved subject. There were certain subjects which were being reserved, that is called residuary powers nowadays, that were reserved for exclusively for the Governor General, or oblique you can say Viceroy. That also provided a bicameral legislature at the center. Bicameral legislature, that what we see today, Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha, that the idea was introduced by Government of India Act 1919. That bicameral legislature at the center, consisting of the Council of States and the Central Legislative Assembly. The Council of State and Central Legislative Assembly both were being introduced. That the Council of State was to consist of 60 members, and its members were to hold office for a term of 5 years. On the other hand, the Legislative Assembly members was to consist of 143 members, and its members were hold to office for a period of 3 years. So you can see that the prototype of Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha is taking place by means of this act. While this is very, very important, what the parliamentary house you are seeing today is being organized by the Government of India Act 1919, bicameral offices. So, while summing up, the position of the legislature at the center as set up under the Act is very, very relevant. And what we see today is an accountable body who is supposed to make laws was given the power to the center. Certain changes were also been brought in the provincial administration, and the most important achievement of this act was the introduction of the system of diarchy in the provinces, and with a new with a view to train the Indians in the art of the self government. This idea of diarchy was being introduced. This act divided the subjects into the categories called central, provincial subject, and gave greater freedom to the provincial government to administer provincial subjects. So this is very, very important. The provincial subjects were further subdivided into reserved and transferred subject. The reserved subjects were to be administered by the executive councillors as in the past, while the transferred subjects were placed under the charge of elected ministries at that point of time, who were to be responsible to the legislative council. The ministries were to be responsible to the legislator, and had to resign if no confidence motion was being passed. So I see that the parliamentary committees, the parliamentary tools and techniques of today is also being formalized by the Government of India Act 1990. So the no confidence motion is all about to hold the government accountable. If it is being passed, the government has to go. In the case of failure of a constitutional machinery in the provinces, the governor can take over the administration of the transfer subject. Idea is what we see today, governors rule, or you can say that the emergency under Article 356 is also being considered in 1919 only, when if there is a failure of constitutional machinery, the governor will assume the power and make laws on the transferred subjects. So this is very, very important, that Government of India Act. The size of the provincial legislatures was also considerably enlarged, and more non-official members were being introduced. So more and more powers were also being delegated to the Indians. So in spite of all this centralization and some democratization brought out by the Government of India Act, this result was still not to the aspirations of the Indians. It brought huge disappointments. People started talking about that we are no longer interested in this kind of adjustment. We are interested in getting self-government or the Purna Swaraj. And from here onwards, the demands for Purna Swaraj has started getting shape in India. And they said that no, we want more, we want dominion status, we want self-determined government. We don't want the extraordinary power of the Governor General. So the people of India were still disappointed. And this is all about the Government of India Act 1919. So any questions? No, then we can say that it when the people were demanding, and it was a period 1919. You must be remember that during 1914 to 1919, the World War First was going on, and people of India, or the leaders of India, thought of that the international situation is giving an opportunity to the Indians to make a bargain, and you made a huge protest during that period of time. And non-cooperation movement was also being launched in 1920, because the 1919 did not fulfill their aspirations. They now started demanding for huge dominion status. The huge boycott, the call for Swadeshi, and the boycott of the elections also took place. And keeping in view of the developments in India, and a Simon Commission was being sent to India, and Simon Commission, with no Indians in that commission, were there. By that time, the government in Britain realized that they cannot rule over India for a longer period of time. So, in a hurry, in a haste, they constituted a committee under the Simon. Simon came, but that enraged the people of India, that you are coming to make understand and the situation of India and see that what Indians want, but no Indian members were being included into this body. And so this has created a huge hue and cry in India. And Simon Commission, which has pushed the most of the political parties in India to join hands. And at that point of time, a challenge was being given to Indians that they cannot frame their own constitutions. And the kind of divisions in India are there, the political parties are divided, they cannot reach on a single table and discuss a kind of constitution. This was the challenge taken over by the Motilal Nehru, and Motilal Nehru came out with a report in 1928, and that was very, very important. That has played a great role. We will consider this point at some other stages. That objective resolutions, which was being passed at that point of time, named as Motilal Nehru report, has served a greater service. And but Simon commissions resulted into a huge lathi charge, out of which the Lala Lajpat Rai lost his life. And keeping in view lots of development has taken place. I told you that that civil disobedience movement is started, and then roundtable conference began. Given this scenario, government realized that it cannot rule. It finally it finally came out with another act, that is called Government of India Act 1935. India Act 1935. So the act is no doubt a milestone in the journey of constitutional developments in India. Some of the important features we need to discuss this. The act was a detailed and a complicated document consisting of 321 sections and 10 schedules. The act provided for the establishment of a federal form of government in place of the prevailing unitary one. The proposal of federation was to consist of British Indian provinces and princely states, though the scheme consisted of some of the essential features of the federalism. Federation, like a written constitution, a scheme of the distribution of powers between the federal government and the units, a federal government to settle the disputes between center and state. It had certain peculiar features which made it unique, one among the federations, and A.B. Keith condemned this whole federal scheme as bastard federation. So this is one of the things people have reacted to this act. But no doubt, a clear-cut division of powers was being made between center and provinces or the constituent units. The act provided three lists, namely that federal list, provincial list, and concurrent list. What we see today in the seventh schedule of India, where there is a division of powers between center and states are being listed. There is one union list, then the state list, and the concurrent list. Similarly, that the Government of India Act 1935 came out with that federalist scheme, where division of powers between center and state was like, on the one side there were federal list where this center can make the laws. There was a provincial list where the provinces can make the laws. There were concurrent lists on which both center and provinces can make the laws. But there was provisions for residuary subject as well. Those were given to the center only. The act also introduced the system of diarchy at the center, and it divided the federal subjects into two categories. And diarchy, which was being introduced by the Government of India Act 1919 for its provinces, the same diarchy was being abolished at the state level, provincial level, and it was introduced at the central level with a scheme like reserved and transferred subjects. The reserved subjects like where defense and external affairs and ecclesiastical affairs. On these matters, the Governor General could administer and make laws and policy decisions. And there were transfer subjects, on the other hand, which were given to the Governor General, which were to be discharged by the Governor General on the advice of the Council of Ministers. See, the ministerial accountability was also been ensured here, and that Council of Ministers was in a way accountable to the legislature. So the Governor General could act contrary to the advice of ministers if he thinks that if it is necessary for doing so. So the whole things has happened. There was a provincial autonomy which was being thought of. Most of the important feature of this act is the provincial autonomy. It divided the legislative powers between the provincial and central legislative powers. The executive authority of the provinces was henceforth to be exercised by the governor and assisted by the Council of Ministers. The similar mechanism what we see today the cabinet system of the government, the council of ministers were being visualized by the Government of India Act 1935. The act also introduced a bicameral legislature in the center. It consisted of two houses, which was already there in the Government of India Act, but it further strengthened it. It is being named as Federal Assembly and Council of States. The Federal Assembly was to consist of 375 members. The Council of State was to consist of 260 members. The two houses were given co-equal powers, even though the money bills could not originate in could originate only in Federal Assembly, not in the Council of State. The upper house could amend the or reject the money bill. The Governor General could veto measures passed by the federal legislatures. So this is another important development. If you will look at the Governor General's power, the Governor General still retained the plenitude of powers, unlike the King of Britain and the President of the United States. He both reigned and ruled. Earlier in that, Queen was exercising constitutional powers, but and while the President of United States exercises the real power, the Governor General of India was having the features of both American and British model. He ruled and reigned both at the same time. He had special powers and responsibilities given by the Government of India Act 1935. He was given almost a dictatorial powers. So much so that even Winston Churchill that remarked once upon a time, saying that the Viceroy or the Governor General was armed with all the powers of a Hitler or Mussolini. So this is the statement of the Churchill. You can imagine the relevance of what has happened at that point of time. And Professor Lovell also observed that the Governor General or the Viceroy of India and the Tsar of Russia are sometimes said to be the two great autocracies of the modern world. So imagine that how much power it has given to that. The act also provided for a federal court, a Supreme Court for all India, with one Chief Justice and 6 other judges. The court was given original as well as appellate jurisdiction. However, the court was not supreme so far as appeals against its decisions are to be taken to the Judicial Committee of the Privy Council. Indian Council was being abolished, and instead of Secretary of State could appoint not less than 3 and not less than 6 members for advice. They separated Burma from India. Burma is now being given independent country status by this time. But 2 new provinces came into being called Orissa and Sindh. These 2 provinces was being created by the Government of India Act. The Act also retained separate electorates provided to the representation of special interest and communities in the federal and provincial legislatures. Separate electorates were extended to also cover the labor class and women voters. Women voters were also being given the separate electorates. Now they can send their own representatives to the center. The Act also provided for the Public Service Commission for the federal government and one for each provinces. This is what about the Government of India Act, and it has introduced. This is a very, very important act, and majority of the provisions of Indian constitutions are drawn from the Government of India Act. The biggest source for Indian constitution is in Government of India Act 1935. Still, the people of India did not go with this act, and they said that they want now complete independence. We want now that I told you that in 1930 onwards, 1929 December, when Jawaharlal Nehru passed a Purna Swaraj resolution, and from then onwards, the demand of the Indian was complete independence. They were not seeking concession, and international situations were also such at that point of time. You know that in 1939 the World War II has started. It continued till 45. It has given an opportunity to Indians so to consider and make appraisals. Indians made the situations to their favor, and when they demanded hugely, they protested heavily and they boycotted British government. British government was in a weakest situations because they were at the losing end. They don't want to antagonize the Indians at that point of time. So therefore, they made repeated concessions to Indians, and one of the concession was the Governor General's statement on 8th August 1940. That is, the then Governor General was Lord Linlithgow, and that offer was being made on behalf of His Majesty's government, and he explained that there must be a new constitutional policy which was to be contained in the August offer. So an offer was being made by Lord Linlithgow to the Indians, and that offer was that Governor General repeated the offer of the Dominion status, that the Indians will achieve the Dominion status once World War II is over. And it was also being promised that the Indians will be given an opportunity to frame their own constitution. And this constitution was to be drafted after the war by such a body representing the principal elements in the Indian national life. The Viceroy was also authorized to invite new representatives to join the Executive Council. A war advisory council was consisting of Indian representatives of the British India, and the Indian states were to be established. The government gave assurance to the safeguard the interests of the political and religious minorities. The British government formally decided not to transfer power after the war. That every promises were being made in this August offer, but there was no offer of giving complete independence. This offer was again rejected by the Indians and saying that we don't want charity, we don't want a dominion status now, we want complete independence. So after 2 years of this offer, that after August offer in 1940, when it was being rejected, another proposals came from this Stafford Cripps. It is known as that Cripps proposal. The Cripps proposal, 1942. So after 2 years of the Second World War, and after 2 years of the almost 2 years of the August offer, the Stafford Cripps came to India, and he made a proposal that there will be a complete transfer of powers to Indians only after the war and partial transfer during the war. In return of this, Britain wanted the Indian leaders to support the Britain and work wholeheartedly for the prosecution of the war. Means for ensuring the allegiance and support of the Indians during World War II. The promise and the proposal of the Stafford Cripps was that you have to support the British. In return of it, partial transfer of power will take place and complete independence will take place only after the war. But again, this whole Cripps mission was a failure. Its proposal was being turned down by all the political parties, even though on a different grounds. Gandhiji condemned this proposal as a post-dated check. Let's see that I cannot rely on a post-dated check. If anything has to be made, it has to be made now. And you know that the Quit India movement has taken place across India in 1942, thinking that now the government has to listen and it has to come out with a concrete measures. And then after, when Cripps' proposal was being rejected, then again there was something called a Wavell Plan. The Wavell Plan of 1945. Lord Wavell was the then Viceroy and the Governor General of India. He also made some proposals after the failure of the Cripps missions, and those proposals were like that. That he said that the ultimate aim of the British government was to give dominion status. The Indians were to frame their own constitution. The Viceroy's Executive Council was to consist of the Viceroys, the Commander in Chief, and other members. All other members except the Viceroy and the Commander of Chiefs were to be Indians. The Muslims were to be given parity with the with caste Hindus in the council. The External Affairs Department was to be transferred to Indian hands, and the Viceroy agreed that he would not exercise his veto powers unreasonably. The Viceroy was to invite political leaders to discuss the interim arrangements for reorganizing the Executive Council. So, for this, the Viceroy convened a conference of the Indian leaders at Shimla. This conference was held during 25th June to 14th July 1945. The talk also failed because while the Congress insisted on the United India, the Muslim League was not prepared to budge from its demand of Pakistan, because by that time Muslim League had passed its resolution, its Lahore resolution, uh, the Karachi resolution. Yeah, see that for a Pakistan, that is called Pakistan resolution. The Muslim League was saying that we want independence from India and we are not interested to go with United India. So Jinnah's was having a different game plan, and he just disagreed with whatever was being proposed and offered by the Wawel. Then, after everything, a cabinet mission plan in 1946 came into being. It was in May 1946. The cabinet mission was consisted of three British cabinet ministers: Lord Patrick Lawrence, Lord Stafford Cripps, and Evie Alexander. Three of them arrived in New Delhi in on March 24th, 1946. The members of the mission contacted and discussed with most of the leaders in India. The mission studied the various alternatives, what ought to be the alternatives for future India, and they also thought of giving India independence. Now, by this time, that British has decided to withdraw from India and give complete independence to India. So the constitutional setup was being thought of. In this, the cabinet mission plan was like this: that there should be a Union of India embodying both British India and the state. It should deal with foreign affairs, defense, and communication, and should have the power to raise finances necessary for their subjects. The union should have an executive and legislative. Union should have an executive and legislatures constituted from British, Indian, and states representative. Any questions raising a major communal issue in the legislature should require for its decision a majority of the representative present and voting of each of the two major communities, as well as the majority of all the members present and voting. All the subjects other than the union subject and all other residuary powers should be vested in the provinces. The state will retain its subjects and power. Provinces should be free to form groups and the executive legislatures. Similarly, the composition of the constituent assembly was also being considered. The mission proposed the formation of a constituent assembly consisting of 389 members. Out of that 389 members, 93 should be state representatives, 4 from the chief commissioners provinces, and the remaining 292 from the British Indian provinces. This was all the composition of the Constituent Assembly. And with this, an interim government was being formed during that period of time, and elections to the Constituent Assembly were also being held in July 1946. And with the thumping majority of the Congress in the Constituent Assembly, it has all the powers to regulate it. And then after, we had got Mountbatten Plan of 1947, because Lord Mountbatten was then the Viceroy of India at that point of time. Who came in India in March 1947, and he was given the charge of smooth transfer of power from Britain to Indians. And he was such a man. He spoke with everyone. He proposed that there should be a division of India into two dominions, and the transference of powers to take place on 15th August 1947 instead of June 1948 as declared earlier. Contrary to the league's demand for a Pakistan including the whole of Bengal and Assam in the east and the Punjab in the west, the plan excluded Assam completely and also suggested the partition of the Bengal and Punjab. The Muslim majority districts of the Sylhet was to decide by a referendum whether it was to join East Bengal or remain in Assam. In the case of Northwest Frontier Province, there was to be a referendum to ascertain where the people wanted to be in either in Pakistan or India. So ultimately, the partition of India was also a part of the Mountbatten Plan, and India was partitioned. So finally, this Mountbatten Plan was accepted by the two leading parties in India, and one is Indian National Congress, and another one was the Muslim League under the headship of the Jinnah. And finally, a date was being fixed. That date was 15th of August 1947 for setting up of the two dominions. It indicated that the territorial divisions of India into India and Pakistan and the constitution of two provinces that is Bengal and Punjab. Pakistan was to comprise East Bengal, Punjab, Sindh, and the Sylhet district of Assam. The responsibility of His Majesty's government in India and the suzerainty of His Majesty over the Indian state would lapse on 15th August 1947. Then Indian state could accede to either of the two dominions. There would be two separate Governor General for each dominions who would be appointed by His Majesty. There would be a separate governor for each dominion. There should be a separate legislature for each dominion with full authority to make the laws. The act was also to contain temporary provisions. The Governor General was invested with the adequate powers to issue orders, and finally, India's Independence Act was being passed with the partitions, and India was being partitioned, and it was ready to have its own constitution. So this is all about that. The first part, that what developments have taken place during British regime, what developments have taken place after first war of independence called 1857, what developments have taken place after 1935 Government of India Act. This is the first part of the discussions on the making of the Indian Constitution. I will be dealing with the another part in the next class. So if you have any questions, you can raise your hands and ask the questions for clarifications. Thank you everyone for listening. With this, my discussion is concluded on the first part of the making of the Indian Constitution.